Welcome back to World War II TV. And for a while, we haven't had one of these shows. It's another Myths Show. And Dan Ellin from the International Bomber Command Center Digital Archive is here to talk about the real masters of the air. And the kind of the myth, or is there a myth, is really this sort of binary way we have spent the last 80 years looking at strategic bombing. But I'm going to bring Dan in now. Good evening, sir. How are you today?
I'm wizard, thank you. Yeah, tickety boo, thanks.
So I'm going to basically hand it over to you, but that's what we were discussing before going live, is that sometimes these myth shows, there is a myth that we debunk. Sometimes we confirm that the myth has some root in truth, and sometimes we kind of let you leave it with, and it's complicated. I think this is going to be in the latter category where it is complicated, but we know we have got these binary ideas of daylight and nighttime and precision and area and British and American and rivalry, and there's a lot more to it, hence why we've brought you here.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is very much going to be sort of back of a cigarette packet ideas kind of thing. But one of the things when I was just thinking about this that we all do, and I think it's probably a mistake, is we tend to split it between what the Americans did and what the British did. And it's you know, it's more complicated than that, as I keep telling all my students.
Indeed.
So yeah. So what I'm gonna hopefully do is talk a bit about what the RAF were doing before and during and probably a bit after the events that are shown in Masters of the Air. So this means we've got to talk a little bit about accuracy, precision bombing, area bombing, those kinds of things. And then the myths. I guess the myths, if we discover any, they're more likely to be the way that the bombing war's been remembered, rather than, you know, poking holes about tonnage and timings and those sorts of things. So I shall see if it works and press the next slide. So the first thing that I thought about when we're talking about 100 group is why they didn't do 100 group RAF, because there was 100 group in the RAF as well. Obviously, there's a bit of a difference. So if you're thinking Americans, a squadron is about the same as an RAF flight, as I understand it. An American Air Force group is about the same as an RAF squadron, and a wing is about the same as an RAF group. So 100 group in Masters of the Air is the sort of same as an RAF squadron. But the RAF had 100 group. It was formed in November 43, and it was a special group. It was radio countermeasures, and it flew all sorts of different aircraft. So the top right of the slide there, that's I think it's a 214 Squadron B-17, RAF B-17. So they were flying in as part of 100 group. 100 group had 14, I think, different squadrons. So quite a big thing. Lots of Mosquitoes flying Sur 8. So flying, looking for the German night fighters, honing in on the Luftwaffe radar, using their countermeasures and shooting them down, and they were very, very successful. We've also got the bottom of that slide is a Halifax from 199 Squadron at RAF North Creek in Norfolk. So that they're flying very similar, or sometimes the same aircraft, from stations just across the road from where the Americans are flying from. So North Creek, that was a radio countermeasures role. They're jamming the German radar and jamming the controllers with things like ABC, Airborne Cigar, Jostle and Mandrel. And then it's the other photo of the six guys and the dog. That's 192 Squadron. So the guy in the middle with the dog in the front row is David Donaldson, Wing Commander David Donaldson. He flew, I think, 86 operations in total. He was a bit of a poster boy for the RAF at the start of the war. And he flew with 149, 57, 156 and 192 squadrons. And yeah, they were flying radio countermeasures. I interviewed the guy for the archive, Reg Woolgar. He ended up being the gunnery officer on 192, and they broke all the rules because all the senior officers all crewed up and flew together. But I think you know, Masters of the Air, wonderful TV. They could also do one on the RAF 100 group. But anyway, that's not what I'm going to be talking about. If you want to find out more about 100 group, there's a book there, Janine
Right.
Harris, came out in 2015. She's passed away now, but it's a really good book, tells a story. So what am I actually going to be talking about? Kind of the way the RAF felt about the Americans coming over here, taking our jobs, taking our women, all the things that we hear about. And I found the song in the archive. Paul, you were saying that you've sung this in pubs with people.
I have sung this in pubs with people. Yeah, it is. It's a classic. It's funny, with some basis in truth, and also some reinforcement of tropes and myths and stereotypes.
Yeah. So join in if you feel comfortable at home. I'm going to try and sing it. We're flying fortresses at 40,000 feet. Flying fortresses at 40,000 feet. We're flying fortresses at 40,000 feet, but we've only got a tiny fucking bomb. Glory, shall we drop it? And it goes on. And we can look at all of these things. I really love the second verse. We don't do navigation. We just follow the guy in front. I mean, it's a criticism of what the Americans were doing. They form up. There's only really one guy who's doing the navigation, and they all drop the bombs when the guy in front drops the bombs. And if they're spread out over a wide area, that's where the bombs go. You can't argue with tons of ammunition and big .5s. You can't argue with armor plating and flak suits. Yeah. Fighter escorts, obviously they missed a couple of types of aircraft out of there, but it probably wouldn't fit. And the idea of the tiny fucking bomb. So lots of people are going to say, the Mosquito with a crew of 2 made out of wood could carry pretty much the same bomb load as your B-17, give or take. And this is a photo on the slide there of an 8 group light night striking force. So they even called it the light striking force. It's carrying the 1 4,000 pounder there, the 1 4,000 pound cookie. So what's really interesting with this is it sung with scorn and taking the Michael out of the Americans, or is it more sort of vive la difference, and there's a pride in the British way of doing it, and there's a sort of professional jealousy or mutual admiration about the different way that the Americans are doing it? And would the RAF chaps actually have preferred to have 40 cals and armor plate? Probably. But there again, there's also they probably wouldn't have wanted to do it the American way. I think they took pride in the way that the RAF were doing the bombing. They liked the difference. I've read accounts and talked to veterans who say, the idea of flying in formation and losing the sort of sense of control and agency, they would hate it. And, actually seeing what's going on rather than feeling sort of hidden and closeted away in the dark is quite interesting to think of. But yeah, the words of the song there, those are some of the facts that of the difference between the way the RAF did it and the way the Americans were doing it. So what I thought I'd do next is sort of a little bit of the history of Bomber Command and why they were doing what they were doing. My daughter is an animator and an illustrator, so I got her to sort of knock up an RAF version of the trolley problem, because I think what the RAF were trying to do, the trolley problem sort of fits it quite well.
Yep.
So at the start of the war, there's a misconceptions that the aircraft that they had, so from Battles to Wellingtons, could find the target. They could hit it with sufficient accuracy and damage the target well enough that they wouldn't have to go back again. So the trolley problem is this idea that they can prevent the mass slaughter that they had in the First World War of the trenches by air power persuading the enemy to surrender. And it was thought that that the bomber would always get through. Yep. And the fear of being bombed, they thought would make people capitulate. So the whole idea of building up a bomber force and bombing targets. The idea was to prevent the mass slaughter that there was in the First World War. So that there's this kind of trolley problem there. And they found, my next slide talks about this, they found that couldn't happen, that just wasn't happening. You can't fly in day without being shot to pieces and having unsustainable losses. So they had to come up with something else, and there's the Butt report and the Lindemann dehousing idea that we can bomb the Germans by night and attack the enemy's morale. So same time as this report's published and the bombing directive comes out, Harris is put in charge of Bomber Command, and he has his own similar sort of trolley problem, which is what the illustration is here. So one of his quotes was, "I would not regard the whole of the remaining cities of Germany as worth the bones of one British grenadier." So this is what I got my daughter to draw. There's a British grenadier, there's Dresden, and there's Harris throwing the lever, and the Lancaster. And he went on to say that there are people who say that bombing cannot win a war. My reply is to say that it's never been tried yet, and this is what he tried. But then there's a certain amount of sunk cost fallacy, because although it was sort of proved by 43 probably that it wasn't going to win the war, Harris just carried on trying. And the trolley problem then goes back the wrong way, because he's trying to save the British grenadier by destroying the German cities. And what he's doing is he's destroying the German cities. He's not saving the life of the grenadier, but he's also risking the life of his 125,000 aircrew, who, the losses speak for themselves. So, the trolley problem didn't work for Harris. We ended up with hundreds of thousands of deaths on the ground, 5 million Germans homeless. And we, despite him destroying 60 plus cities at a rate of, was it 2 a month at one point, we still lost the 55,000 aircrew. So it didn't work. So my next slide is the history. It's how did we get there? So the idea was that at the start of the war, it's a similar sort of learning curve to that the Americans had for the start, and obviously they went slightly different ways. But the idea was that flying in formation, the bomber would always get through, and the mutual defence, they could defend themselves and shoot down the attacking fighters. Although we think of hurrah for Spitfires and everybody wanted to be a fighter pilot, at the start of the war and in the 30s, it was the bombers who were thought to be the whiz kids in the super aircraft. Battle of Heligoland Bight in December 39. 24 Wellingtons took off looking for German shipping. They were met by lots and lots of German fighters over the sea. And out of the 12, they lost 12. Out of the 24, they lost 12 aircraft. So it was after that the decision was made to fly by night, because those sorts of losses are just totally unsustainable. And then the next thing is the Butt report in August 41, where they found that only 1 in 3 aircraft were getting within about 5 miles of the target. And then, of course, Harris took over in 42, trying to follow the dehousing directive, bringing in area bombing. And he started to do it as efficiently as he possibly could with the tools and the aircraft and the manpower at his disposal. But the RAF never really gave up on the idea of flying it in daylight and having the degree of accuracy that you get with daylight operations, because they kept trying right and through until I think May 43. They kept flying the odd daylight operation, and usually they were fairly unsuccessful. So Augsburg raid, April 42, yes, heroic action, terrible chop rate. I think it's 58% and 1 VC. So they kept trying different tactics, and the breakthrough really was the idea of the bomber stream. So Harris and his first 1,000 bomber raid against Cologne in May 42. The idea was the old way, the crews would be briefed and they would be given the target, and then it was up to them about how they flew there and what time they arrived over there and when they dropped their bombs. So a raid on a target could last 4 hours. With Operation Millennium and the start of the idea of the bomber stream, all the aircraft, 1,000 aircraft give or take, had been and gone over the target within about 90 minutes. And of course, this got quicker and quicker as the war progressed, as they got better at flying and navigating. So Cologne was followed by Essen and Bremen, and they really got quite clever and scientific about it. So they even learned how to start to deal with the idea of creep back. So the following aircraft would drop their bombs a little bit early, so the bombs would land a bit earlier before the aiming point. And they developed the idea of the bomber stream down to a fine art. And then of course they brought in other things like the pathfinders who accurately mark the target as well as accurately as possible. And then the idea of the master bombers controlling, saying bomb the greens, ignore the reds, and those sorts of things to increase the accuracy. So that was the RAF's learning curve, and they were doing both precision and area bombing attacks over Germany, while the Americans were still, I'll put, relearning their trade. So here we've got Hamburg and the dams. Yeah. But again, it's everybody knows about the dams operation, but it's totally unsustainable losses. And Hamburg is the way that makes the RAF bombing effective. So over several nights, the Americans joined in on a couple of operations during the day, but several nights and days Hamburg was hit. 4 times the RAF went with about 800 aircraft, and the losses were under 3%, I think, for the Hamburg raids. But of course, 40,000 plus were killed on the ground. But this is what the RAF were trying to do every single time they took off with a mixed load of incendiaries and high explosives. This is what they were trying to do. This is what Harris wanted them to do. So the RAF were doing area bombing attacks. They were still doing precision attacks. They were still trying every now and then to see if they could pull off a daylight operation. So Augsburg was like, well, let's see if this new aircraft, the Lancaster, can do it. About the same time, the Americans are, they've sort of grown out of the short range targets in France, and they're trying their hand at hitting targets deep into Germany. And then that's when you get the terrible American losses at Schweinfurt and Black Thursday, and their losses there were again unsustainable, about 26%. So we have to talk a bit about accuracy and the idea of pickle barrel. So the Americans made a great deal of the Norden bomb sight, but the weather in Europe, you can probably see clearly to use that sort of bomb sight 2-3 days a month if you're lucky. So more and more they were using the similar sort of techniques as to the RAF, and I think the bomb aimer in this photo has got a RAF Mark 14 bomb sight, which is fairly similar to the Norden bomb sight. And then later on, 617 had the SABs, the stabilized automatic bomb sight, which was fairly accurate on a good day. But both forces, both the Americans and the British, were using things like H2S or H2X, as the Americans called it. And I suppose it's arguable that the Americans bombing bad weather bombing through cloud using H2X were possibly less accurate than the RAF bombing at night with H2S and Pathfinders and all the ways that they worked out. Al Murray, I think the other day, said the Americans were actually dropping bombs with a sort of level of accuracy that was equal to the Butt report in 41. Right. So similar sort of leeway, 5 miles. And Tammy Tammy Davies-Biddle puts it quite well. She says something like, precision was just propaganda that was bought and has been amplified since then. So yeah, accuracy and precision, it's not quite a myth. It did happen every now and then, but it was, you know, it wasn't the norm. And then going back to the RAF and the Americans and the tiny bomb, there's a couple of images here. So the Lancaster is carrying what was called the usual load. So that's a 4,000-pound blast bomb, and then 12 cases of 4-pound incendiaries. Whereas the B-17 in that photo, I think its maximum load of a range of about 800 miles was about 4,000 pounds. So yeah, you can see why it was easy for the Brits to just say, yeah, tiny little bomb. Looking at the time, I need to talk faster or
no, we're all good.
Okay. Now this I think it's not quite a myth, but I went and looked at the numbers and the dates, and I was actually quite surprised. So, you know, everybody knows that the Americans bomb by day and the RAF bomb by night, and the little nickel leaflet that was dropped over Germany says day and night with joined forces, and you know, it's a bit bizarre because that's a sort of picture with Lancs and B-17s. But as I said, the Americans tried a couple of times to fly night operations because, you know, at the start the British said you're going to get shot out of the sky if you don't fly at night. So they did, and they did try, and they weren't particularly good at it, or they didn't like it, so they stopped and persevered. And of course, when there's more numbers and fighter escort, they found that they could sort of just about get away with it. So yeah, the Americans tried nighttime operations in 43 and again in 45. The RAF kept trying daylight operations up until about May 43, and then again after June 44. So there's a period of about 12 months when the RAF only flew night operations. Right. Most of the rest of the war, they flew a mixture, and it varies in number. This is a target photo of Trossy. It's a V1 site. This one was taken 3rd of August 44. The following day, the RAF went back again, and that's the day that Bazalgette won his VC for attacking the same site. We got quite excited because bottom left of that target photo, there's a Lanc that looks like it's diving and crashing, but it's actually just the way the angles of the photo is, right. And he's just banking away from the target. But yeah, so this is a sort of a possible myth that we can bust, that the Americans flew by day and the Americans flew by night, and they didn't switch it up, because they did. And then there's this idea of, you know, what is precision and what is an area target. I think one of the things that I'm more and more coming to think of is, you know, I've been studying the RAF, and you have to think of the bigger picture. You have to think of it as a combined offensive, and you have to think of it as a partnership. So these are, you know, shameless plug. These are a few bits and pieces from the IBCC Digital Archive that show that, you know, the camaraderie and competition even between the two forces. So on the left there is a photo from RAF Feltwell. It's a rifle competition, a shooting match between the Brits and the Americans. The British won. The Lee Enfield's better than the American carbine, apparently. Well, it was on that day anyhow. And then we have a letter from David Donaldson, the guy I had the photo of him before, from 192 Squadron, saying, you know, thank you to his counterpart for letting one of his crews land at an American station when they needed to. And then we have the photograph of Cheshire and Spots, and I think Doolittle's in there and Cochrane's in there, having a bit of a meet up on an airfield to discuss things. So whether you're thinking of precision or area attacks, I think that they're hitting the same sort of targets in pretty much the same sort of ways. That both air forces are doing exactly the same sort of thing. They're being shot at by 88mm and 102mm flak guns and fighters. There was little difference between night fighters and day fighters as far as the German were concerned towards the end of the war. So yeah, they're doing the same thing. They're working together while they're doing it. So masters of the air, were any of them masters of the air? At certain times of the war, both of them, the losses were unsustainable, and tactics had to be changed. And it's always a game of cat and mouse. As the Germans develop one thing, the Allies develop something else. So yeah, I don't know that. I don't think anyone knows the name of that B-17 that's been hit. But the Lancaster tail is it's a 626 squadron Lanc from RAF Wickenby. All 7 crew were killed. It's just illustrating that if you're flying in the air, whatever you're flying in, whichever air force you're in, it's not very nice. And, so that Lanc was on an operation to Mali the camp, and it was shot down by a night fighter. So it's they had the similar learning curves of how they how's best to get on with the job. And then I think there's a couple of points I want to make with this slide. Both forces, American and British, were sort of technically masters of the air by 45. They could pretty much do what they want, and the Luftwaffe couldn't say an awful lot about it. War, was saying earlier, war is it's horrific, it's horrendous. 600,000 Germans were killed on the ground, 5 million made homeless. The Americans lost 28,000 air crew. The RAF lost 55,000. But I think there's, whether you're British or American, you're in a small metal tube flying very high, terrified at times. There's a chance your life could be snuffed out at any given moment. And it's the same for the people on the ground. They're not in a metal tube, but they're in a confined concrete space. And the same thing is, they could be killed at any moment. So Americans and the RAF, they're hitting pretty much the same targets in all but name, with a similar level of precision, and they're coming up against the same risks and the same factors of fear. And I think that's about my last slide. Thank you.
Well, brilliant stuff, Dan. And folks, before you say it in the sidebar, well, you already have. Dan is coming back next month for a longer show about a specific subject connected with Bomber Command. But I think you summed it up there, really, Dan. I mean, this Masters of the Air fallout has been, everything's been binary. The Americans have one doctrine, the British have another doctrine, area, precision, and it's blurred the line between healthy rivalry and competition. And I'm sure the guys back at the time were a bit uncertain about where those boundaries met and crossed. It's like football fans in a pub, isn't it? There's kind of healthy banter, and then it can get a bit nasty, then it can go back to being healthy banter again, then the fans of another team come in and it confuses it a bit. And I think
I like that, because we all hate the other football team that's just up the road that wear the different colour shirts to us in the same city, but when it's the World Cup and you're playing Germany and Italy, and
that, I think that's where we're going to end this, is that it's complicated. This one is not a myth we're either proving or disproving, or it's just saying that there's a lot more to it than just two separate systems via two separate organizations doing totally separate things. The lines blurred then, the lines blurred now, and that song that we had up on the screen there, that could be sung in a friendly, boisterous way, and it could be sung in an aggressive, negative way. Who are we? It's the tone in which it's done, isn't it? And
Yeah, and it was probably sung in both ways.
Yeah, exactly, and probably changing halfway through a verse, and I think that's, when you look at like that, the pub in Cambridge that has all the graffiti in it of all the air crews, British and American, Australian, Canadian. The crews were gathering at various times during the war. There'd have been lots of drinking together, and there'd have been punch-ups. There'd have been inter-British squadron punch-ups. There'd have been inter-American squadron crew punch-ups. That it's a highly stressful situation where people are, as you said there, we're seconds away from instant death at high altitude over occupied Europe. And of course, spirits ran high, and I think that's an important thing to leave it at there. But yeah, just remind us. Well, not remind us. We haven't said it yet. What are you coming back to talk about next month? So we get people's excited about that.
The way that Nuremberg has been remembered, and I've been talking to people like John Nichol and Andrew Davies, who wrote Conrad's War, right. And there's Nuremberg is always used as a sort of as showing how bad it was for Bomber Command. It was the one where everything went wrong. It's the same as Schweinfurt for the Americans. It's the one we all have to talk about and discuss. And yeah, it's been a big part of the way that Bomber Command's been remembered. I think if you go past the very, very basic binary of Dams or Dresden, Nuremberg's probably the next one that pops up.
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to that. And again, folks, in all of our online discussions, everybody's having discussions about Masters of the Air, and they're comparing it to other series, and people are finding things that are wrong with it, finding things they like about it. But the point is, most of the people now discussing it do not have any actual memories of the events. We're talking about it as several generations removed, and that the few people that are around who did serve in Bomber Command or the 8th Air Force, from my understanding, they have a lot of mutual respect for each other. And I think they probably did at the time, and they do now. And I think we should keep all of our conversations civilized and respectful, which we mostly are. This channel, we're a good bunch. But Dan, I will see you again next month. And
Wizard, thank you.
I'm back in 25 minutes when we're talking with Sarah Patterson about the women in the US Marine Corps. So thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you in 25 minutes time. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Cheers.